Hey guys, my name is Dave. Thank you for being part of this today. Today we are in part 2 of our new series called Culture Shock. If you've missed last week when we had part 1, I want to encourage you, go on YouTube or go on Spotify and catch up on this message where we talked about stepping on new grounds. I think it's an important message that you need to hear. But today we're doing part 2, and actually today and also in the coming weeks, the coming Sundays, we want to be looking at different culture shocks together. Different things, trends or challenges, changes that the pandemic brought to us, or things that were accelerated by the pandemic. Things that are, if you remember last week, that are giants that are in front of us. Things that we need to be aware of. Just so we can be prepared, but also we need to be aware of as a church and think through, okay, how are we to respond? What is God calling us to do in light of this change or this new phenomenon that we now have in this world that has changed so much by this pandemic? And so today we want to start out with the first culture shock, and it's simply this: loneliness is everywhere. Loneliness is everywhere. And maybe you're saying, hold on, Dave, that's not really that shocking. That's not really that surprising, because we had loneliness before the pandemic. And of course, you're right. We had loneliness in Berlin, has always been a massive issue. Before the pandemic, I read the statistic that 1 out of 3 people in Berlin, 1 out of 3 would say, I don't have any friends in my life. So that's before the pandemic already. You would have every third person you meet would say, I don't really have friends in my life. I feel lonely. But now that has been accelerated like crazy throughout this pandemic, that now in 2021, 65% of young adults in Berlin say, I feel more isolated, I feel more lonely now than before the pandemic, than 2019. Just in this, obviously we know why that happened. In this time now, we've all had to social distance from each other. We've all had to cut down on our contacts, and of course, our social life has suffered because of all the limitations and all the restrictions. And so many people are suffering now from loneliness. Loneliness now is everywhere. I was talking to one person. He said to me that it feels like I'm drowning in loneliness. And then he admitted something to me that he felt so embarrassed to share, but it broke my heart. He said, sometimes I hug my own clothes in my cupboard just so it feels like I'm having human contact. Isn't that incredibly heartbreaking that there's a guy who's so lonely, he's hugging his own clothes just to feel like he's with other people? Jessica from our church, she wrote something on her Instagram a few weeks ago. I've asked her if I could share this, and I just want to read it out. She wrote about the isolation that she's experiencing, and she said, it's quiet when I go to bed. It's quiet when I get up. It's quiet when I work. It's quiet when I have free time. But I'm filling my free time with more work just to keep myself busy. I'm lying in the bathtub for hours staring at the ceiling. I'm drinking red wine on the sofa for nights on end staring at the wall. I'm trying out online dating because I'm afraid that this will be my forever normal. I get sad when I open up my Instagram and I'm confronted with the family life of others. I'm sitting motionless at my piano because I don't even know what to play anymore. Maybe this sounds familiar to you too. I'm sure many of us are also dealing and struggling with feelings of isolation and loneliness. Loneliness is now everywhere, and it's shocking that it's everywhere. It's affecting so many people around us. And psychologists, they would differentiate, or they would say there's a social loneliness and there's an emotional loneliness. Social loneliness is where you look at the quantity of relationships that you have. And so social loneliness or isolation means someone has very little or none social contacts or relationships with other people. Emotional loneliness doesn't look at the quantity but the quality of those relationships, because we need to also be real about this. It is possible, would you agree, it is possible to be lonely in a group of friends? It is possible to feel lonely in a team at work. it is possible to feel lonely in a marriage. Loneliness is not just incredibly sad, it is also incredibly dangerous. Guys, seriously, it affects our health in dramatic ways. There's studies that prove this, how loneliness can cause mental struggles, like depression or even dementia or heart problems. It really is a risk to our health. It's more dangerous than alcohol. Loneliness, it kills more people than alcohol. That's how serious this is. Now, the Bible is so clear that we were not meant to live life by ourselves. We were created to live in community, to live in a collective. That's how we flourish. God says in His Word, it's not good for man to be alone. And so I think God's heart is breaking when He sees this loneliness epidemic that is all around us now. I think God's heart is breaking because He said, that's not what I have in mind for you to be all by yourself. That's not how we are wired. That's not how we are created. And God has a solution. Did you know this? God has a solution for the loneliness problem. He has an antidote to it. And we read about it in Psalm 68, verse 6, where it says, God sets the lonely in families. Now let that sink in for a moment here. God sets the lonely in families. That's the gospel in one sentence. God sets the lonely in families. That's a summary of the Bible. That's the heart of God. He sets the lonely in families. And we can see this heart of God also in the passage that we have today. We already, just now, before we went to the breakout room, we already heard the passage read to us in Isaiah chapter 54. It's a bit of a strange text, right? Isaiah 54. It's a promise that was given to the people of Israel when they were in exile in Babylon. It was given to the people of Israel then, and Israel, or the people of Israel, they are being addressed by God through the prophet. They are being addressed as a lonely, barren woman. That's how God addresses them. You are a lonely, barren woman. And this theme of barrenness, if you think about it, it's interesting because last week we talked about a barren soil. A soil where there is no fruit that grows on that soil. It's hard soil, it's rocky soil. And we said for years it feels like the spiritual soil in Berlin has been hard and not much grows here. And so a similar image we're given here in this text today, and we can just apply it to us as well, that there is now a woman who is barren, childless, hopeless. And yes, of course, this is a passage, a word from a prophet in a specific moment in time who gave a word from God to the people of Israel in a specific moment in their history. But in Galatians chapter 4, Paul refers to this passage here in Isaiah chapter 54, and he links it to the church. He says this passage here, this prophecy, is a word for the church. It's a word for us. And so we can read this prophetic word given to the people of Israel, and we can also say this is a word that was given to us. And so let me read again what God is saying here about a new day, something that He wants to make new. He says, sing, barren woman, you who never bore a child. Burst into song, shout for joy, you who were never in labor. Because more are the children of the desolate, of the lonely woman, than of her who has a husband, says the Lord. Enlarge the place of your tent. Stretch your tent curtains wide. Do not hold back. Lengthen your cords. Strengthen your stakes. For you will spread out to the right and to the left. Your descendants will possess the nations and inhabit the cities of loneliness. God is saying here, have hope. I'm putting an end to the loneliness. How? He says, I'm making you a family. I'm establishing a family here. So he says, get ready. Prepare the home. Enlarge in your tent. Don't hold back. Lengthen the cords. Strengthen your stakes. Make room for a family. Get ready for some noise in the house. Get ready for some messiness. Get ready for there to be some chaos. Get ready for a family. You're going to be a mother. What an amazing promise of hope. And I think what we can see here is God's vision for the church. God's vision for our church. is for us to be a family where the lonely find a home. A family where the lonely find a home. That's what we're called to be, guys. That's what God is asking us to be in the middle of this loneliness epidemic. He says, I want you to be a family where the lonely find a home. Now, what does that mean? I believe it means three things. Maybe you want to write these down. First of all, it means we're called to make room. We're called to make room. Just a few moments ago, we showed you a video of the new venue that we found where we can soon start again with in-person services. I'm really excited about the opportunities that lie ahead of us here. And you saw that this is a massive room. It's probably way too big for us. It's much bigger than the room that we had at Forum Factory. And it's intentional. Not just because we think, oh, yeah, we probably have to do some social distancing there for a while and we need to have room to set up enough chairs with distancing. No, it's not just that. We want to make room for the family to grow, for our church family to grow. And so it's what we're invited to in this verse here. Enlarge the place of your tent. Stretch your tent curtains wide. Do not hold back. Lengthen your cords. That's from the tent, right? Strengthen the stakes, the poles that hold the tent in the ground. For you will spread out to the right and to the left. I know we're not nomads who live in tents, but we can understand the picture here. That God is saying, get a bigger tent, okay? Prepare for growth. Don't be shy. Don't hold back. Make some more room amongst yourselves. You'll spread out to the right and to the left. In Luke chapter 14, Jesus says God wants his house to be full. I think we can see the same desire here. Now, can I be straight with you? And can I just say this, please? It's one thing to make room in a building. It's another thing to make room in our hearts. It's one thing to make room in a building. It's another thing to make room in our hearts. And I just wanted to say this and address it, not because I want to point fingers or I want to rebuke or judge or whatever. I just want us to be real with ourselves, and I want us to be able to admit that as Christians, we have a tendency to be a bit tribal at times, to be a bit clan-ish at times, to be a bit close-knit at times, where we like each other, but when someone new walks into our tent, when someone new comes along, that is seen as a disturbance or as an interruption. And please don't get offended that I say this, but can I ask us all, can I ask you for a favor? Can we erase from our vocabulary this sentence, they are new, I don't know them? I know you don't mean bad when you say that, but when you think about it, it's just not helpful. It's not welcoming. It actually is a bit divisive when we say, oh, they're new, I don't know who they are. You know, it's an us versus them mentality where we are the church, we are Mosaik, and you are new. You first have to prove yourself. You first have to show who you are, and then we'll think about whether you can stay in the tent or else we'll kick you out again. It's for a new person, that's what it sounds like, really, when we say that. I know we don't mean it, but that's what it sounds like. For the new person, he thinks like, oh, I'm not sure if I'm welcome in this tent. I'm not sure if they want me here. I'm not sure if this is a family where I also get to belong when I'm met with suspicion. What does this text tell us? How are we to... what is it supposed to be our posture when a new person comes in? Does it say we have to be suspicious of new people? Do we have to have our arms crossed and think about who is this over there? No, what does it say? It says, sing, burst into song, shout for joy, hands in the air. There's a new person who came into our tent. Welcome, welcome. We love that you're with us. That should be our posture. That should be the excitement in our heart. So we're called to make room. That means we're called to rejoice that God is growing our family. We're called to be a church that is friendly, that is welcoming. That's one of the values that we have in our church. We want to be an open and inviting church. By the way, did you know that the Bible actually gives us an outward sign of how we can celebrate, when the family is growing? The outward sign that we're giving is baptism. Baptism. Yeah, we often take baptism as a symbol for individual who had an experience of conversion, and now he wants to make that public. Which obviously that's true. Baptism is a symbol of someone's conversion, but it also, just as much, is a symbol of incorporation, of being welcomed into the church family. And I just want to say this. I know it's getting summer now. We're still kind of not really sure yet how we're going to do service now with outdoor or right straight to Heeresbäckerei, and I hope we'll have clarity soon on this. But I hope that at some point this summer, hopefully soon, we can have a baptism service. Maybe somewhere outside, in a lake, or at Spree River, or somewhere. Or we set up a pool somewhere in a park or something. We would love to have a baptism service. And maybe you have been thinking about being baptized. Maybe you've been thinking about it for a while. Maybe you haven't thought about it at all yet. Or maybe you have been baptized like me. I was baptized as a baby, and that's great. But maybe you're thinking, can I be baptized again? I just want to say, if you have questions on baptism, if you want to explore this more, if you want to find out what that actually is and what that means, I would love to talk to you. And I want to invite you to be baptized this summer. It would be an amazing celebration for us, really, to just rejoice, sing for joy, burst into song. That's amazing. You're part of God's family. We want to celebrate that, okay? So the first thing is we're called to make room. The second thing is we're called to be family. We're called to be family with each other. We're not just making room to welcome guests. We are welcoming family members. There's a huge difference. When a guest comes to your house, you're glad he's there, but you're also glad when he leaves again. But a family member, no, that's different. That's someone, you're coming to stay. You're part of this. You live here now. You're one of us. In Ephesians 2:19, it says, you are no longer strangers and outsiders. No, you are citizens along with all God's holy people. Citizens, that means you're a citizen in the kingdom. But then he goes even more intimate, even closer. You are members of God's family. You're not just citizens in the same nation. No, you're all members of the same family. That means you're sharing the good, the bad, and the ugly all together. In the family, there is morning breath. There is arguments. There's tantrums. But also, there are tears. There is silly dancing in the living room. There are games. There are deep conversations around a meal table. We're called to be family. And again, guys, this is what God has in mind as the antidote, as the solution to the problem of loneliness. He wants people to experience family. Because what is it that lonely people crave the most? They're homesick. They crave a home. Maya Angelou, she wrote, "The ache for home lives in all of us. The safe place where we can go as we are and not be questioned." What is that, a home? It is a place where you are loved and accepted. Where you are loved and accepted. Those two things, love and acceptance, that's what every person on the planet deep down is longing for. Every person who experiences loneliness is experiencing the loneliness because of a lack of love and acceptance. When you experience love and acceptance, you don't experience loneliness anymore. You see what I mean? Love and acceptance, those two things are two things that Jesus commanded the church to be, to live. Love and acceptance. Let me show you. In John chapter 13, Jesus says, "By this, everyone will know that you are my disciples, if you sing the latest worship songs." Oh no, it doesn't say that. If you post Bible verses on Instagram. No, it doesn't say that either. If you love God. No, it doesn't even say that. What does it say? If you love one another. That's how people will know that you are my disciples, if you love one another. We're called to be family. That means we're called to love each other. You know, sometimes we ask this question, how can we in the 21st century make the church a bit more relevant and attractive to people? I think let's just do this. Let's love each other. Let's be whatever it is that the world hungers for the most. A family, a loving family. When we are a loving family, we could not be more relevant. We could not be more relevant. Let me tell you a secret. Loving churches grow. Maybe not a secret, maybe it's obvious. But I'm fascinated, and I spend time studying churches and movements, not just here in Germany or in Europe, but around the world, where God seems to be on the move. churches that are growing. It seems like the one common denominator that they have in common is that they love well. They love each other, and they love the people that join them. And it is so attractive. Love is so attractive. It's in Berlin. Would you agree that Berlin is starving for love? If we learn how to do this, guys, we will explode. We will have to close the doors to keep people out, because so many people will want to come and be part of this. We're called to be a family, which means it's a place of love, but also the second thing, right? Love and acceptance. We're also called to be a place of acceptance. And Paul says in Romans 15, he says, accept each other just as Christ has accepted you, so that God will be given glory. What is he saying? Accepting is a form of worship. It honors God. God will be given glory. So we don't say, hey, get your life in order, clean up your act, learn how to behave, make yourself acceptable, and then we will accept you. That's what the Pharisees said in the time of Jesus. Their mantra, their posture was, cleanse yourself, and then you can sit down with me and we can eat together. What did Jesus say? The exact opposite. He said, sit down, eat with me, and I will make you clean. He accepts unconditionally. Unconditionally. That's the gospel. That's how we were accepted. And in this verse we are told that we are to accept each other as Christ has accepted us. So we're called to make room, we're called to be family, and then the third thing real quick, we're called to thrive. We're called to thrive, we're called to flourish. Again, God's dream here is to establish a family so loneliness can end. And the season of unfruitfulness, he says, that's coming to an end. The storm is over. And then he promises here something else in verse 11. It's now a new metaphor. He's now talking about a city that is being rebuilt. He says, "O afflicted one, storm-battered, troubled and desolate, lonely, I will rebuild you with precious jewels and lay your foundations with sapphires." We love that because our name is Mosaik, right? Like, ooh, jewels, precious stones. I like that. "I will make your towers of sparkling rubies, your gates of shining gems, and your walls of precious stones." It's a beautiful image. He says after the storm, the city will be rebuilt with precious stones. That means even after this corona storm, I believe God is saying, I will rebuild everything that you have lost, everything that is in ruins, everything that has crumbled away, everything that's been falling apart. God is saying, I will rebuild it all. Man, I don't know who needs to hear this right now. I think this is a word for someone. Where maybe you're saying, man, it feels like my church has been falling apart in the last year or so, or especially maybe you're saying because of that, my spiritual life feels like it's falling apart. I'm hanging on by a thread here. It's all crumbled. It's all falling apart. There's not much left. But God is saying, I will restore. I will renew. I will renovate. I will reconstruct. I will recover it all. You will get it all back. And I will rebuild it with precious stones. What does that mean when God says, I will rebuild it with precious stones? I think it means two things. First of all, I think he's saying, I'll rebuild it in a way that you never could. If you would rebuild it, it would just be rocks. But if I will rebuild it, I will rebuild it with precious jewels. It will be more beautiful than before. That's what he's saying. And the second thing he's saying, when he says, I'll rebuild it with precious jewels, I think he's saying, I'll do it in a way that you know it's me, so that you won't be able to take any of the credit. The glory is mine, God says, and I'll do it in a way that you'll know it's me who's at work in your life. I haven't given up on you. I will rebuild it all, God says to you. Man, if you take nothing else from this message, maybe that's all you need to hear. When God says, trust me, I can rebuild it all. In verse 13, he continues then, and he says, all your children, these children that are now filling this tent, all your children will be taught by the Lord, and great will be their peace. In righteousness you will be established. What does that mean? All your children will be taught by the Lord. That means God has more he wants to show us. God has more he wants to reveal to us. More that he wants to teach us. We get to thrive not just because God is the rebuilder of our church, He also continues to be the revealer of all truth and all wisdom and all guidance and everything that we need. He wants to teach us. Yes, God wants to have a big family. I believe that. I have faith for a big family here at Mosaik. But He's saying that big family doesn't mean that any child will be neglected. Because sometimes that can happen in a big family. Oh, there's children there who are not being looked after. No, God says it's my responsibility. As the Lord of this church, I'll take this responsibility to continue to teach. And interestingly, Jesus in John chapter 6, He quotes this verse. And He applies it to Himself. He says, this is going to happen. That the children will be taught by the Lord. This is going to happen through me, through Jesus. Well, He says, I am the teacher. I am the classroom. I am the curriculum. I'm all these things. It's going to happen through me. And then He also says, great will be their peace. Great will be their peace. The word peace here is the word for thrive. It's the word shalom. It means more than just the absence of conflict. It means, so many translations, harmony, wholeness, fruitfulness, blessing, freedom, joy, fullness, friendship. That's what shalom means, right? And then it continues, He says, in righteousness you will be established. In righteousness you will be established. And we may just read past this little sentence here, but this right here really is the game changer to our problem of loneliness. In righteousness you will be established. What does that mean? Well, let's now zoom out a little bit of this chapter and look at the context of where this chapter lies in the book of Isaiah. Because in the previous chapter, in Isaiah 53, it's a famous chapter. Maybe you're familiar with it. Isaiah foretells something about what Jesus would do. He's talking about the suffering servant who would bring about salvation. And then kind of in the order of the book. So that's Isaiah 53. He's talking about what this suffering servant would have to suffer. And then in the next 5 chapters, chapter 54, but also the other chapters after this, he's not so much talking about Jesus, but he's talking about the salvation that He would bring about. So 54, this chapter we looked at today, is very much about what Jesus would bring about. The promise of the church. A tent, a house that is full with descendants who are taught by God, who are loved, who are family together. And so in Isaiah 53, we really have to go to this chapter if you want to understand 54, if that makes any sense. So in Isaiah 53, Isaiah talking about Jesus, the suffering servant, here's what he says about Jesus. There was nothing special or impressive about His appearance. Nothing we could see that would cause us to like Him. He was despised and rejected, a man of sorrows, acquainted with deepest grief. We turned our backs on Him and looked the other way. He was despised, and we did not care. What does that mean? Jesus experienced loneliness, utter loneliness. He knows what it's like to be lonely. Verse 4, it was our weaknesses He carried, our loneliness He carried. It was our sorrows that weighed Him down. He chose to carry our loneliness. He took it upon Himself. Why? Why would He do that? Well, we need to understand that our deepest loneliness is not our emotional or our social loneliness. Our deepest loneliness is a spiritual loneliness. It comes from separation from God. Because of our sin, we are separated from God. We have distanced ourselves from God. Our sin has destroyed our relationship from God. And because this relationship with God is broken, spiritually we are lonely. Spiritually we are all by ourselves. And that's why we have an ache in our souls. That's why we have, spiritually speaking, we feel a homesickness. That's why we can be compared to this desolate, barren woman in Isaiah 54. But Jesus says, enough with the loneliness. I'm putting an end to this. So He took our loneliness upon Himself. And through that, because He took it from us, we can now be reconciled with God. Because Jesus took our loneliness upon Himself, we can now again be reunited with God. We no longer have to die alone. He sets the lonely in families. That's really the heart of the gospel. He sets the lonely in families. We get to be children of God again. And I think that's what it means when it says, in righteousness you will be established. That means you can be made right with God. You're right with God again, and that's the foundation. That's how you are being established. That means your ultimate loneliness, guys, your ultimate loneliness can end. You don't have to be alone. You don't have to die alone. You don't have to remain a lonely, barren woman. God says, I will establish you in righteousness. That means you can thrive. You can be united. You can be reconciled with me. And he says in verse 5 to this lonely woman who is being promised a family, he says, for your maker, your creator is your husband now. The Lord Almighty is his name. The Holy One of Israel, he is your Redeemer. He is called the God of all the earth. The Maker is your husband. That means no more separation. You're no longer by yourself. No more loneliness. You can be joined together with God like a husband and a wife are joined together. And what God said to Israel here, I am your Redeemer, but also the God of all the earth. I think this is the same thing God wants to say to us as a church family. I am your Savior. I am your Redeemer. But I also want everyone in the whole earth, in the entire city, I want everyone to be saved. I want them all to be saved. The people in Berlin, God says, who are so lonely and who are far away from me, who are separated from me, I want to set them in this church family. That's my plan. I want to set them in this church family. So, get ready. Make room. Strengthen the cords, okay? Lengthen the tent, okay? Make it bigger. Enlarge in your tent. Make room. Make room in your hearts as well. I'm establishing my family here, God says. It's my answer to the loneliness. A family that will thrive.